Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into something huge, a total revolution in how we teach history. It's all about moving away from just memorizing stuff to actually learning how to think.
Okay, let's be honest. For a lot of us, history class was, well, it was a bit of a slog, right? Just this endless parade of names, dates, and battles, all stuff you had to cram into your brain just to spit it out on a test, and then, poof, it was gone.
And for the longest time, the whole philosophy behind it was kind of like this quote here. The idea was that dates were like hooks on a wall. And the facts, well, you just hang the facts on those hooks. The thinking was you had to build this rigid structure of facts first before you could even begin to understand the big picture.
But you can probably guess what happened. This whole just the facts approach created a massive problem. A crisis, really. Students were just bored out of their minds, disengaged, because who cares about a random date from 300 years ago? They couldn't see how any of it connected to their own lives. So history became this thing you just had to get through, not something that could actually be exciting or, useful.
All right, so let's really break down this old way of doing things. We can call it history as inheritance. The name says it all, right? It's this idea that history is a fixed story, like a family heirloom that gets passed down from one generation to the next, completely unchanged.
And the main goal here, it wasn't just about making you memorize stuff for the sake of it. No, it was actually a tool for what they called social cohesion. The thinking was, if everyone learned the exact same celebratory, patriotic story about the nation, it would create good citizens and this really strong sense of national identity.
But, as you can imagine, this approach had some pretty serious problems. For one, the textbook was basically treated like the Bible. You didn't question it. That kind of shuts down any real thinking, right? And because it was this one single story, it meant a lot of other stories got left out completely. The perspectives of women, of minorities, of regular working people, they were often just gone.
And this is where we get to the real heart of the matter. This is the conflict that basically sparked a revolution in teaching. The big question became, what is history class for? Is its job to create patriotic citizens who all share one story? Or is its job to create citizens who can think for themselves, who can look at evidence and question the world around them? And that single question, well, it changed absolutely everything.
Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the new way of thinking. This is what we call history as inquiry, and it completely flips the script. History is no longer that fixed heirloom. Now it's a dynamic, active investigation.
This new approach is all about historical thinking, and it totally transforms the student's job in the classroom. You're not just a passive sponge anymore, soaking up information. Nope, you're now an active investigator, a detective. You're learning how to analyze the clues, the evidence, and build your own understanding of what happened. And here's the really wild part. You might think, well, if we're not drilling facts, kids won't know any facts. But it's the exact opposite. Knowing the facts becomes a result of doing the investigation, not something you need to do beforehand. Studies actually show that students in these kinds of classes remember more facts. And it makes perfect sense, right? When you're actively using a piece of information to solve a puzzle, your brain locks it in. It's the huge difference between just seeing a fact on a page and actually using it to figure something out.
So you're probably wondering, how does this historical thinking thing actually work? What does it look like in a classroom? Well, it's not just some vague idea. It's a very specific set of tools. Think of it as the historian's toolkit.
There's this myth that historians are just people who have memorized the encyclopedia. That's not it at all. They're not walking trivia machines. Instead, they have a system, a framework for how to look at evidence and make sense of it. And this whole framework is built around 6 key ideas. All right, let's look at the first 3 tools in the kit. It all starts with historical significance. You have to ask, why does this even matter? Why are we talking about it today? Next, and this is crucial, you use primary source evidence. So instead of just reading in a textbook that a treaty was signed, you might actually read the treaty itself, or look at letters from the people who were there. Finally, you look for continuity and change, basically spotting the patterns. What's different now versus then, and what's surprisingly the same.
Okay, now for the next 3 tools that take the investigation even deeper. You have to analyze cause and consequence, untangling that messy web of this happened because of that. Then you take historical perspectives. This is a tough one. It means trying to see the world through the eyes of people back then, with their values, not ours. And last, you have to grapple with the ethical dimensions. What moral questions does this story from the past force us to ask ourselves today?
And that brings us to this key distinction, primary versus secondary sources. This is literally the engine that drives this whole new way of thinking. The old way, it was all about secondary sources, like your textbook. The new way puts primary sources, the raw stuff, right at the center. It's really simple. It's the difference between reading a review of a movie versus actually watching the movie yourself. Now, this whole shift from inheritance to inquiry isn't just some dusty academic debate. Oh no. It is right at the center of some of the biggest fights we're having today, about education, about misinformation, and about who we are as a nation. And one of the most urgent battlegrounds is the internet. I mean, look at this. A major Stanford study found what they called a dismaying inability among students to figure out what's real and what's not online. Even though they've grown up with this stuff, they have a hard time telling an ad from a news story or spotting a source that's totally biased.
So what's the solution? Well, it's about taking that historian's toolkit we just talked about and using it on the internet. This is called civic online reasoning. When you see some crazy claim online, you do what a historian does. You check the source, you put it in context, you see if other sources say the same thing. I mean, these are survival skills for being a citizen in the 21st century.
And this brings us right into the middle of the new curriculum wars. You see this playing out in the news all the time. On one side, you have calls for a patriotic education that's all about that shared national story. And on the other side, you have historians and educators pushing for a more critical, evidence-based approach. It is literally the inheritance versus inquiry battle playing out in school boards and state legislatures right now. Okay, so let's zoom out and put it all together. Let's look at these two completely different ways of teaching history, side by side. This chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? The old inheritance model, its goal was national unity. It saw knowledge as this fixed truth. It used the textbook as the ultimate authority, and the student's job was just to receive it. But the new inquiry model? The goal is to create smart, engaged citizens. It sees knowledge as something we build from evidence. It uses primary sources. And it turns the student into an active detective, an interpreter of the past.
So, when you boil it all down, this is more than just a change in lesson plans. It completely redefines what history class is. It's not a story you're handed anymore. It's an investigation you get to lead. It's a set of skills for figuring out how the world works.
And that leaves us all with a really big question, doesn't it? What is the ultimate point of teaching history? Is it about forging a specific identity? Or is it about fostering the skills of inquiry? Should school tell us who we're supposed to be? Or should it teach us how to figure that out for ourselves? The way we answer that is going to define what kind of citizens we have tomorrow.